So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today for today's Arctic Data Management event. I'm Alan Pope. I'm a program officer for cyber infrastructure or polar cyber infrastructure at the National Science Foundation. And more importantly, I'm one of the co-leads for the Arctic Data Management collaboration team here in IARPC. As we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the circumpolar Arctic is the contemporary and ancestral home to many different Indigenous peoples. As those who are working in or residing in the Arctic, we recognize these lands and waters as the mostly unceded traditional homelands of Indigenous peoples. Wherever you may be viewing this webinar, IARPC honors and recognizes the place-based knowledge of Indigenous peoples and their ancestral and contemporary stewardship of their homelands. So I welcome all our webinar participants to do the same. For example, I am based in Western Massachusetts, the homeland of the Mohican peoples. So it is the responsibility of all of us to learn, know, and gain a better understanding of the Indigenous peoples and cultures with which we engage. There we go. So I also want to start out by saying that IARPC Collaborations is a community space. Our code of conduct aims to support a community where all people feel open and safe to participate, introduce new ideas, and inspire others. If you haven't already read our code of conduct, you can find that on the IARPC webpage. We expect everyone to adhere to the principles for conducting research in the Arctic, appreciate and accommodate our similarities and differences, be inclusive, commit to self-improvement, give professional feedback, recognize the colonial history of science and research, and respect intellectual property and Indigenous data sovereignty. We will not tolerate derogatory language, personal attacks, unacceptable or unlawful use of intellectual property, unwelcome sexual attention, or violence or threats of violence. So if you do need to report a code of conduct violation, there are instructions on the IARPC website or iarpc-collaborations.org/code-of-conduct.html, and I'll put that in the chat in just a second. Yes, and if you're joining by phone, the link is available in the footer of the IARPC Collaborations website as well. Just as a reminder, as you entered the meeting, your audio should have been muted by the host. I note that we have one or two people joining over the phone. You might not have been automatically muted, just so you know. You may turn on your video at any time, as well as your mic. However, we do ask you to keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking and during the presentation to just help prevent disruptions and background noise. And if you are joining by audio or joining audio by phone, you can mute and unmute yourself by pressing *6 as well. And when we get to the discussion later on after the presentation, you may use the chat at any time to ask questions or make comments. And when we get to the discussion, please use the raise hand feature to indicate that you would like to speak so that whoever's running the Q&A or discussion can call on you, because we do have quite a few people on today, which is really exciting to see. And if you are on the phone, you can raise your hand within Zoom by dialing *9 as well. As I mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the event page and on the IARPC YouTube channel later or I should say next week. In the case of Zoom bombing or other disruptions, we will remove the disruptor and close the meeting room. I have not seen that ever happen on an IARPC call, so I wouldn't be worried about it, but just FYI. And if you're having technical difficulties, please send me a private chat message and I'll do what I can to help you out. Also, I wanted to let you know a little bit more about the IARPC data management team in particular. So if you are one of the team co-leads and you happen to be here, maybe raise your virtual hand so people can see you at the top of their list of shared video. So the IARPC team co-leads are Jordan Kazemi from USFWS, Lauren Decker from Polarctic, and Vanessa Raymond from ASAP. I am Alan Pope. Like I said, I'm one of the co-leads for now, but I am outgoing. I am leaving, rotating off my role in NSF's Office of Polar Programs next week. So I'm really excited we got this event in under the wire before I had to rotate off. And Mike Brady from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency was also, until recently, a co-lead of the group, and he also rotated off as well. You can stay up to date, join the conversation, and just find out more about the team on the IARPC Collaborations website as well. And I'll just take this opportunity to tease our team's next event. We're going to be having a joint event with the Terrestrial Ecosystems Community of Practice in November, discussion with different data center managers, describing the data in their archive and ways that researchers can access data and collaborate. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, so I have been talking for a long time. I will now hand it over to our presenters from the Arctic Data Center, Angie Garcia, Jeanette Clark, and Matt Jones, who are going to be talking about building computational data science capacity in the Arctic research community. They are going to have their presentation, some time for Q&A in particular there, and then we'll also have some time for general discussion and a collaborative session on sharing resources around Arctic data management training. If you want to get started in sharing, there's a link to a Google Doc there. I'll drop it in the chat just after I stop sharing my screen. So we want to make this a collaborative working space as well for you to share other resources that you might have. But we'll come back to that at the very end, and I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over to the ADC team. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So I think Angie's going to lead us off, so I'll let you go ahead and get started. Angie, just let me know when you want me to move forward with slides.
Perfect, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Angie Garcia, the outreach, I'm the community engagement outreach coordinator for the Arctic Data Center. And today we're going to be touching on building computational data science capacity in the Arctic research community. I'm here with Jeanette Clark and Matt. All right, we can go on to the next slide. All right, so a little bit of an introduction into the Arctic Data Center. So we are the primary repository for the National Science Foundation's Arctic program. We are an open access repository, and as a team, we work with researchers to curate their data and help create metadata. And at the moment, we have 6,994 data sets available on our website. Next slide. So the Arctic data spans a variety of disciplines. We have hundreds of data sets on various disciplines. We can see the themes within the data sets like oceanography, anthropology, environmental management, and a lot more. Currently, I don't see the photo of our 3D cesium map that's available on our website. Oh, there we go. So we make it easy for repositories to have all their data sets categorically searched either by date and other search filters that we have. And now we have this new feature here with a 3D cesium map where you can select map layers and adjust the map display settings, but see it in a different light. And the next slide. So the Arctic Data Center features and services, our primary services are data archive, the data discovery portal, and other tools and infrastructure that we offer, but we also have support services like our training and outreach and data rescue. Next slide. And so we wanted to focus on the 2022 community survey that the Arctic Data Center worked on with ARCIS and IARPC collaborations. So the objective of this survey was to understand how individuals engage and connect in Arctic research activities, and to kind of better understand how to drive future courses and workshops and other supporting programs by the three of these communities. Key findings from this survey was that 75% have or had received NSF funding. Majority work with quantitative data and open access repositories. But one of the main barriers with the survey was insufficient time so not everyone gets to share all of their data. And a clear need that we found was that we should have clearer guidelines on metadata requirements and better coordination among repositories. And we saw a key interest expressed in more data training and workshops in collaboration. So hopefully the courses we'll be offering this coming year will open the opportunity to the Arctic community to come and learn a little bit more. And then the next slide. So we also just wanted to highlight FAIR and CARE principles. So FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and then CARE, collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And these two principles tie into our ethical data practices that we'll go ahead and discuss in the next slide. So the Arctic. Did Alan mention something?
No, you can go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't know if my connection was a little wonky. I'm in Costa Rica. So the Arctic Data Center has adopted both CARE and FAIR principles in our data practices during our data submission. First of those is data sensitivity. So our normal data practices and interaction with the community provide guidance when submitting data. So when it comes to data sensitivity, we've implemented the use of data tags, for example, to allow researchers to indicate the level of sensitivity or restriction with their data. So anything from a blue tag, which would be non-sensitive, to a crimson tag, which would be a maximum sensitive personal information. And then the next slide. So the ethical Arctic research practices, our ethical practices page has been pretty useful. We found that our practices that are found on our website have a lot of information that can be useful, not only to the Arctic community, but to other communities. So it's a resource that is available and can always be reviewed. And we welcome the community to take a look at it and offer any suggestions if needed. But these practices are something we highlight in our training materials, which Jeanette is going to go ahead and cover.
Thanks, Angie. So as part of the Arctic Data Center curation process, we have this workflow where submitters will submit data sets to us, and then our curation team enters into this communication loop where we review the data sets. We ask the PIs questions, we revise data sets, and the PIs ask us questions. Like Angie mentioned, this ethical research practices that we've included in our data submission form is often something that people have questions about. And so we find that these communications with our researchers end up being sort of a training opportunity in themselves, and that, researchers have a lot of questions and we're happy to answer them as the support team. But over the years of being part of the Arctic Data Center and communicating with thousands of researchers over who knows how many emails, we've discovered that everyone tends to have the same or similar data management problems and questions. We get a lot of questions, but they tend to fall into a much smaller number of categories. And so our training program was really born out of this idea that, how can we help researchers more efficiently, both so that maybe we don't have to answer as many emails asking the same question, and so that researchers aren't constantly having to, email us and ask us, how to do something. Go ahead, Matt. So our first training program that we ran in the first 4 years of the Arctic Data Center is called Reproducible Approaches to Arctic Research Using R. This is an overview of the schedule for that course. I'm not going to go through this in detail, and you don't need to read it in detail, but some of the things that I wanted to point out was that in our course, we have a mix of technical and non-technical sessions running over about 4.5-5 days. And we interweave new tools with data management fundamentals. And so this particular course assumes a basic knowledge of R, where the participants, use R a little bit, but really want to expand their knowledge. And so we go over things like how to publish and submit to the Arctic Data Center, how to do literate analysis with R Markdown. We go over Git and GitHub for code versioning. We talk about how to structure and organize your data, how to clean and organize your data using R, writing functions and packages, and so on. And so this is a course that we ran in person for a long time, and then during the pandemic, we switched to running it remotely, and we still run this course remotely, actually. But one of the challenges that we ended up finding as we were running this course is that it captured only a slice of experience levels that researchers had, and the researchers that we communicate with. This assumes your researchers are using R already, and so researchers who have no programming experience would have a really hard time with this course being able to catch up, and then researchers who are very experienced might find that they're not really learning that much new, interesting stuff. And so, go ahead, Matt. So in the last, starting in year 5 of the Arctic Data Center, we expanded our program to add 2 new additional courses to help sort of capture some of those 2 other ends of that distribution. So the first of the 2 is called Fundamentals in Data Management for Qualitative and Quantitative Arctic Research. This course is run in person in Santa Barbara, and we've run it twice now. This course assumes no programming knowledge at all. So if you look over here on the schedule, we have in the first half of the first day, a couple big blocks on an introduction to programming in R. So starting from the very beginning. This course also is aimed more at social science researchers or other researchers who might work with more qualitative or text-based data. And so at the end of the course, we introduce a couple of lessons on building reproducible survey workflows and sort of a very small introduction to how to do text analysis in R. And then throughout the rest of the curriculum, we incorporate some of those other aspects of the course that I just talked about, where we teach folks how to model and organize their data, how to clean and manipulate it, how to plot it. And we also incorporate a couple of our practice sessions to make sure that participants get a chance to practice in the course what they've learned. And then finally, we have a couple of sessions in this particular course on ethical data collection and care principles, really focused on some of the subtleties that come with working with human subjects. Go ahead, Matt. The second course that we added is also taught in person in Santa Barbara. This is Scalable and Computationally Reproducible Approaches to Arctic Research. This course is quite a bit different from the other 2 in that it's taught in Python. So this course is aimed at experienced programmers. We assume a pretty high level of knowledge of Python. And it's aimed at people who are working with big data. So particularly people who are finding that they can't do the analysis that they want to do on like their local laptop. And so we start out with learning how to program on clusters. A lot of the courses focused on parallel programming. So we get a lot of practice on how to parallelize code and how to do that well. We talk about data structures and formats for large data, more geospatial analysis, in addition to cloud computing. And then finally, we have some of our non-technical and sort of data management fundamentals sections as well, like documenting and publishing your data, and data ethics, of course, like Angie talked about earlier. Go ahead, Matt. Throughout all of our courses, we take a really similar approach to teaching that we've refined over teaching lots and lots of courses at NCs over the years. And I'm going to talk about a couple of highlights of the aspects of our approach that I think are really important. So the first is that we design our curriculum around building workflows. We really try to not silo techniques into individual sessions. So this means that, for example, with Git, we have a couple sessions that focus very heavily on Git, teaching Git, the mechanics of Git specifically, but we also incorporate Git practice throughout all of the other lessons. And that goes with many of the other techniques that we learn. And this is quite different than what you would get if you were to go online and just search for like, how do I do ggplot, for example. So we really try to structure our lessons and our curriculum such that at the end of it, you end up with something that looks kind of like what your research workflow might look like in your actual day-to-day work. Related to that, we use real Arctic data sets and case studies to illustrate and solve real problems. So again, we're not using any of the built-in R data sets or anything like that. We really want the things that we teach to look like the types of work that researchers are doing. So we use all the real data with all of the real problems and subtleties that come with it in our courses. And then finally, we really place a strong emphasis on building engagement, and we do that in 2 different ways. So first, we create a pretty wide variety in session formats. As you may have noticed, the schedule is packed and it's long over 5 days. And so to try to make sure to keep people engaged And to accommodate, different learning styles, we vary our sessions in terms of their length, their type, and their format. So we have very few sessions that are just a person talking at all of the participants. Most of our sessions have a hands-on focus where participants are coding along with the instructor. We also have lots of sessions that are run in small to medium-sized groups. We have sessions where we get away from the computer and do whiteboarding and diagramming. And so all of this is aimed towards getting, again, this really high level of engagement. The last thing that I'll say with regard to this is we also try to make sure that we have a really high number of instructors per a high instructor-student ratio. So for every lesson, we have a lead instructor and then a couple of helpers who go around the room. We try to make sure that no one gets left behind. In technical courses like this, it can be very easy to get stuck on a syntax error for 10 minutes, and then before you know it, you're lost for the next 3 days. So those instructors who wander around try to help solve those little problems quickly to make sure that everyone's able to stay together. And we really, really try to keep the group together as we move through the curriculum. Go ahead, Matt. And I've cherry picked a couple quotes here. So our course feedback overall, we've taught a lot of these at this point, has been very, very positive. We've taught 440 participants across our major courses and smaller events. And 99% of them say that the courses met their expectations, and a similarly extremely high percentage, like in the high 90s, say that they would recommend the course to a colleague. And so we're really proud of the work that we're doing at the Arctic Data Center. We're constantly trying to improve our courses and really meet the needs of the Arctic research community. Go ahead, Matt. And lastly, I'll just talk briefly about what I think our keys to success are. And one of them is that there's a lot of ways to learn how to program online, like I mentioned, but very few of those methods or platforms are oriented towards research science, and even fewer are oriented towards Arctic research. And so I think that our success is at least in part because we put so much focus in our teaching strategy on sharing knowledge within the context of real workflows and real data sets that look like what researchers actually do. And that's in contrast to, going onto Coursera or something like that and picking an R course, which can be a fantastic way to learn. But I think that our courses, the participants in our courses really enjoy the experience of seeing something that looks kind of like what they do. And again, we really work hard to engage everyone in our courses and keep them engaged throughout the intensive week. At the end of the course, typically, everyone's developed this great rapport, everyone's having fun. I've taught a lot of these courses, and every time I leave, I think like, oh, that was a great time. It was very tiring, but it was a great time. And so that's really the kind of vibe that we try to build in our workshops. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Matt, who's going to talk about some future directions and some bigger picture stuff with our Arctic courses.
Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, that was a really nice overview of what we're doing at the Arctic Data Center. Interestingly, like Jeanette said, we're very proud of our ability to sort of engage with the community and the opportunity we have to really try to help out. But we also view that as kind of a small slice of the larger set of issues that surround capacity building, especially for data science within the Arctic research community. There have been a variety of different plans and proposals that have come out through various reports in the Arctic community that all call for increased capacity building and training opportunities for the research community and for others. Everything from the IARPC research plan to the Horizons 2020 report for the Arctic Horizons and others. I wanted to focus on a couple of these that were relatively more recent. We helped organize a workshop on the landscape of data and social science in 2020. And that workshop really was very strong on recommendations about the need for training at the interface between social science and communities and social science and environmental science, with a sort of an emphasis that training opportunities for the community should cover a variety of issues around data sharing, but also around data sovereignty and other types of data ethics issues. So that was an important thing. There's also a big emphasis that real social science data should be used as examples and case studies within these trainings. And that's part of the motivation why we started our new course, where we focused on social science examples in our qualitative course, specifically to try to connect with that community better. Another recent workshop that is working on a report is the Greenland Data Workshop. And two of the real big issues is that they really would like to see international collaboration on educational programs that offer data science training at a wide variety of different tools and standards and other approaches, but across international boundaries, which I think is an interesting challenge to try to figure out how to tackle. And that they also were recommending that universities and data centers should conduct these trainings as short courses because they're really more approachable that way, and they can go to different geographic regions to really target groups that need them in different places. So I think the need and the sort of recognition that there's a broader need for training in the community is there, and the capacity. I think the real issue is figuring out how to fund and sustain these types of training initiatives and get them to be synergistically working together across data centers, across national programs and other sorts of groups. So from all of that sort of feedback, one of the things that we've focused on is developing new courses and new modules, as Jeanette mentioned, that really cover some of these issues. So both Angie gave the example of how we're incorporating ethical research practices metadata into our workflows and engaging with the community that way. And then we have these new modules within all of our courses on data ethics and how researchers are interacting with local communities and handling their stuff. That includes sort of references to a lot of the ongoing and evolving literature around this. Like I have a figure here from Carol's paper in 2019 about Indigenous data sovereignty and its relationship to governance. And these sorts of, I think, topical areas are somewhat new to a lot of the research community. And so I think sometimes these courses are the first time groups get exposed to some of these concepts, or it may be the first time they think about these concepts within the light of their discipline. Especially physical science researchers might oftentimes think that there aren't ethical considerations for their data, and that they really, starting to think about that more becomes more of an issue once they've gone through the course. So we're really trying to expand our courses and make them relevant to the community, and we pay close attention to all these different reports that are coming out that make calls for these things. So one of the things that we've seen recently is a call for sort of more advanced training. And there's a lot of researchers in the Arctic that want to take advantage of advanced modeling and analysis techniques. So we've recently gotten involved with a new program called Cyber 2A. It's a program led by Wenwen Lee at the Arizona State University. And this is basically to try to build upon the type of scalable computing course that Jeanette talked about, expand into machine learning and provide new analytical approaches using AI techniques for Arctic research. So there's three primary goals. One is to expand the Arctic AI research network, so people that are able to take advantage of these techniques in their analysis. Second is to develop an online training set of materials and in-person workshops to sort of test out concepts of being able to introduce Arctic researchers to these. And then the third is to build a sustainable and scalable learning community where researchers and faculty that might want to teach this stuff in their own university courses can take advantage of that. So we're really looking forward to this. This program is just getting started right now. We have a number of different project activities that are going on. A webinar series, which we invite you all to participate in, that will be starting up soon. An online learning curriculum that we're hoping to be community developed and maintained. We're going to run some additional training workshops, and we're going to run an Arctic GeoAI challenge. So some of the topics that we'll be diving into are things like introductions to neural networks and other ML types of techniques, processes for sort of making data AI ready. So what does it take to have a data set really be effectively used within an AI context? Model training and testing and parallel processing, some of the pragmatics of how you actually get these things to run on large computing systems. And then we're going to have a series of labs on Arctic specific issues, like showing how machine learning can be used to both basically classify and detect permafrost frost slumps throughout the Arctic region from satellite imagery. So there'll be a variety of those types of very specific labs that people can pick from in building a course from these materials. So we're excited about this. It's an opportunity, but it kind of shows how we sort of have to find ways and find resources to really build these courses out that we can then offer to the community and incorporate in the broader sort of panoply of things that we can teach to the community, or that we can offer the community to teach to each other. So meeting community needs is really, kind of our focus. And I think that there's a lot more that we as a community can do in this sort of data science training and capacity building. As you can see, we have needs from everything from the introductory level all the way to the advanced level of computation and data management. We need to cover both qualitative and quantitative data management issues. There's a huge topical diversity in the kinds of things that we want to cover, from data science and management and analytics, but also data policy and ethics and team building and collaboration. And so I think one of the insights that we've had is that these issues, that these sort of topical issues that we're covering in these courses, while we want them to be relevant to Arctic researchers, they're not fundamentally an Arctic problem. These are problems that are faced by every researcher in every discipline, regardless of where you're working. And there are a wide variety of other efforts to build training capacity in these spaces. So I think we've been starting to think a little bit more about how we directly engage with some of these large national programs that are doing this kind of training as well. So the Carpentries has been around for a long time, offering really introductory short courses. But there's other more in-depth things like the NC's Learning Hub, which we're involved with at NC's, and the Earth Lab curriculum, which comes out of the University of Colorado, are both focused on these more in-depth trainings for a broad variety of disciplinary groups. And then finally, groups like ESIP offer things like the Data Management Training Clearinghouse, which provides a venue for people to exchange training materials. So we really think Arctic researchers, while we want to keep the focus on Arctic to some degree, we also think that there's a benefit in trying to connect to these broader national and international programs. The other thing that I think is important to think about is how this short workshops formats for trainings fits into the broader educational framework that we're embedded in. So in the last couple of years, there have been a number of different programs that have cropped up for data science. So one of them at UCSB, where we are, is the MEDS program, which is a Master of Environmental Data Science, targeting Earth and environmental researchers. And the goal there is to give people an entire year to focus on data science and really build out their skill set that they can bring back to their research careers in future things. And then similarly, the Berkeley Institute for Data Science up in Berkeley has a whole program. There are dozens of these types of programs around the country now that are focusing on data science. And there's some sort of a relationship, and I don't think we've really figured out what it is, between the kind of short course landscape that we're involved with training Arctic researchers and these graduate programs that are either specialized like these on data science, but also just normal courses within graduate programs within, say, the University of Alaska Fairbanks Fisheries Program, or within some other universities focus on Arctic climatology or something. So I think that there is an opportunity to think about how short courses are complementary to these sort of like other graduate education opportunities that are out there, and how we can feed them. Like I said, these university programs I think are much better sequenced. They are, people think through the whole issue of like, how do you go through a multi-year program and really build a set of complementary courses that don't overlap, that can build upon each other, that have a well-known set of prerequisites. The short course world is a bit more all over the board with that in terms of thinking about how people would actually use that. So I think we should think about how short courses from places like ADC fit into this larger landscape, and how we can help people advance their careers. So I'll just return to this 3 set of courses that we run: the fundamentals of data management, the reproducible practices, research practices, and the scalable computing course. These 3 courses are going to be run again by us next year. So the fundamentals course is in January, reproducible research practices in February, scalable computing is in March. And we have applications open for that as a free course. We're really looking for to be able to serve the community and help people participate when they want to. So spread the word, please, and help us figure that out. We're really looking forward to this discussion today. So I think that's it for us for today. And then Alan and Lauren, I don't know how you want to run the discussion and Q&A, but I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Matt and Jeanette and Angie for such a great and engaging and informative presentation. I think the way we'll run this is we have about 20 minutes left in our time. So we're gonna start off with, if people have questions or comments that are directly in relation to the Arctic Data Center presentation, we'll start with that, give it up to 10 minutes if people are really engaged, and then we'll transition over to a more general discussion. If we don't have questions, we'll just move that transition over a little bit sooner. So as a reminder, if you have questions that you'd like to ask, please use the raised hand function, and you can ask it over audio and video. If you prefer to put questions in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. And in case you weren't here when I shared this working doc link before, I just put it in the chat as a place for you all to also share any resources or training opportunities that you might have. So with I'll vamp a little bit more for people to hopefully have some questions that they might want to ask our ADC team. I see Jana or Yana, if you'd like to ask your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just have to take myself off mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I had a question for Matt or Jeanette on the Cyber 2A program, and wanted to know if that is aimed at programmers who would then be developing or using deep learning tools, or if part of it is aimed at researchers who would just like to use AI in their own workflows to solve problems or be more efficient.
Yeah, so we're still discussing what the exact target audience will be for those tools. We could make that more of an introduction to these techniques for researchers that might not be engaged in AI at all, and try to basically bring them into that community. Or we could also make it focused more on researchers that maybe are already heading down that path, and as you say, might have more established programming skills and want to level up to the next level. So I think those are both open options, and I think we'd love to hear the community's feedback about where the right level of emphasis is. Wen Lee, who's the lead on the project, has been looking at like the distribution of use of AI within different communities, and she's noticed that there's been an exponential increase in the use of AI across the geosciences community, but that there's been kind of a flat uptake in the Arctic research community. So she has been sort of sharing a graph of that, which I think is really interesting. And it would be interesting to think about why that is for the Arctic research community, why it isn't seeing the same sort of exponential growth, and what might explain that. So if we can figure that out, maybe we can figure out how to best target the courses and the opportunities.
Awesome, thanks so much for the question. Anybody else? I'll ask one question because I have my polar hat on, where I work across both Arctic and Antarctic. A lot of times we think of Arctic as having unique data management issues, and there definitely are a lot of Arctic specifics. And so I'm curious how, or if there are particular areas of Arctic specific focus that you really touch on, in addition to the techniques that you elaborated on, or is there a lot to be gained from more general, I guess, data management training as well? Or training / resources, I should say.
Yeah, I know, Jeanette, if you have a perspective on that, but I'd say I don't think there's anything particularly about the Arctic that is different, per se, except that there's probably more of an emphasis on interactions with local communities and indigenous groups in the Arctic than we see in other parts of the US. And so that sort of ethical interactions and co-production emphasis, although it is widespread across the community now, I think in the Arctic it's particularly strong, and probably an area of emphasis there that we might need to focus on more than in other, like say somebody that's working in the southeastern US or something. But probably I think maybe a little ahead of the curve, and that will pick up in other parts of the country as well. But we'll see.
Yeah, agreed. The rest of the techniques and in terms programmatically speaking, everything that we teach could be applied to Arctic or non-Arctic research. We use Arctic examples so that it has a level of familiarity, but you could use, non-Arctic examples, and the same techniques would still apply from a technical perspective.
Yeah, and we actually do that. We teach this course to many non-Arctic groups, and it's all the same types of stuff. We oftentimes will switch up our data sets. One of the challenges for us is figuring out how to maintain multiple copies of the same lessons that use different data examples, because it's a lot of work to get this stuff working with each data set. So we've had a hard time figuring out how to just maintain the set of materials across different communities that we really want to see different data examples.
Thanks. Rosemary, I think you had your hand raised next for a question. So if you want to come off mute and ask, please do.
Sorry, I lost my mute button. I
No worries.
appreciate the opportunity to see some of this information. One of the complexities I have is being in a small community and trying to get some big questions related to the rapid changes of emissions around our community, and having obstacles being a small community and trying to get into the data sets. When we have community interest for protecting our life, health, and safety, and the importance of our tradition and culture, a lot of the modeling that is being done gives me much more concern because of the variables of concentration of the land areas around the Arctic, in which data interpretation can really affect a small community, and how we can help ask questions, but get our questions answered when we're limited in who is putting research out there in these different ways.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, Rosemary. And I think that question of like how we, I think there's a couple of things that are sort of latent in what you brought up. One of them is the way in which researchers interact with local communities, and whether we can do a better job with our training opportunities to make sure that that is following the CARE principles, and that researchers have built healthy and mutually beneficial relationships with communities and their both data and analytical needs. But another one is also to think a little bit about capacity building for analysis and data use within communities. I think the Alca project has done a really nice job of interacting with local communities and trying to run a variety of trainings and other types of ways of passing information back and forth with collaborative groups. That's a long running project, and I don't know if someone here is from Alca that wants to talk about that. I think it would be really helpful to sort of talk about the way in which Alca has interacted with local communities if somebody is online. But if not, then I suggest that's a thread we should pull on more.
Great. Well, I see that Jay has his hand raised, and then Noor did say that she can speak to that. So Jay, do you want to ask a question? Then we can go over to Noor
Sure.
to talk about Alca.
Yeah, Noor was more in line with this. Mine's more orthogonal. This is kind of a question for, well, Alan, it's for you and Matt. This was really cool. This was a great presentation. I run a couple DOE archives. Do you connect with like the Arctic Data Collaborative? Have you federated your data holdings with other agencies' Arctic data holdings? This comes to mind because I kind of fund to an extent the Arctic Data Collaborative at UAF. And I'm just kind of curious because there was a statement made about kind of regional data. We kind of started that effort because there was an awful lot of privately held Arctic data, and building it up, making sure we interact appropriately with that community has allowed the community to actually put it into the Arctic Data Collaborative. This is really old, ice flows, permafrost, but it was all privately held. So yeah, I do see the sensitivities, and I think that that's important to address, absolutely. But I'm just curious, have you federated with other data holding agencies, to build up your broad sweep that you offer? That's it.
Yeah, I don't know, Alan, if you want to address that generally.
I was
before
going to say,
talk
Matt,
about
I think
data center.
you go about, you go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Jay, yeah, thanks for the intro to that. I think, as you know, we are collaborating with a lot of other repositories. We are partners with the Earth System Science ESS Dive repository from the DOE, and they use the same software framework that we've developed for the Arctic Data Center. They use that for the DOE facility. We're both members of the Data One Federation, trying to federate data across all of the research communities that various agencies support, both including NSF and DOE, but also NOAA and NASA and other groups. So yeah, we very much are focused on federation. We work closely with like the ARM facility out of DOE is also a member of Data One and doing that. Many repositories that might be, say, thematically based, like HydroShare or others, also have extensive amounts of Arctic data as part of their collections. And so we think it's important to build general data science frameworks that are federated, that you can then pull out, say, regional collections or even community collections of data that are relevant to that. So yeah, I think it's a really important thing. There's not enough emphasis on federation, and I'd really love to see agencies focus on that more. And I'd welcome talking about the Arctic Collective, which I was not familiar with until you just mentioned it. So I'd like to learn more about that.
Awesome. That's one of the goals of these meetings, is building connections and connecting these to these different pieces. So that's awesome. Noor, would you like to share a little bit about Alca and trainings available from Alca and what Alca is up to? This is, by the way, a perfect segue into the kind of collaborative working section of our meeting. We'll still have availability for questions. I see, Ben, you just raised your hand, so we're not going to move on too quickly. But I'll just mention again, we have this working document. I'll put the link again in the chat in case you joined in the last few minutes, where if you have other resources or training opportunities available, please put them in there so that we can all kind of crowdsource these ideas. If you want to start a section for things you're looking for, you're welcome to put that in there as well. And we'll have that shared out on the event page and put it together as an outcome from the working group as well. With no further ado, Noor.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks, Matt, for mentioning Alca. Yeah, so I think just to sort of respond to Rosemary's question about, are there efforts that are trying to connect more directly with communities and help provide trainings and support for data management at that level. Alca has been active in working with community partners since about 2006. And we work with a network of partners from across the Arctic. So a lot of our partners are in Alaska, but we also have partners in Canada and Greenland and Northern Europe. And much of what we do is supporting community-led research projects or projects that involve communities in a significant way to think through how to manage and store their data, make sure that data isn't lost so that it's safeguarded for the long term. And then we develop some online tools and resources to share information and data from communities in a way that respects their data sovereignty and really supports them to protect data that they want to protect and then share and make publicly available data that they would like to share. So we do some trainings and some capacity building and capacity sharing through our network. So we just had a couple of weeks ago, we had a network meeting of our partners in Fairbanks, and the different projects that are part of the network were able to share with one another how they're approaching data management and what they're doing to safeguard and share their data. We don't right now provide general trainings where we just sort of invite anyone to come. We have not done that yet, but that's something that we could do if there was broad interest. So I put our website in the chat, Rosemary, and if you would like to follow up with us, you can reach out to us through the website, and then I'll also put my email here. And then Natasha or Tosh Haycock Chavez is on the line on part of this meeting too, and she's our network coordinator and outreach manager. So she's another person that you could reach out to if you're interested in talking about anything specific to the needs of your community around data trainings.
Thank you so much, Noor, for sharing that. Really appreciate it. I think I saw Ben Charles with a raised hand before. I wanted to make sure we didn't overlook you if you wanted to contribute or ask a question.
Oh, sure, but I'd rather wait for Matt's intervention on the work that's being done by the Arctic Data Center on federated research or search for polar regions. I think there was a comment in there by Alan Pope, by yourself, but I'd rather wait for Matt's response. I think it
Matt,
might.
did you see the question in the chat, or do you want me to read it out loud?
I'm scanning for it now. We'll go ahead and read it because I didn't quite catch that one. So.
Yeah. So the question, Mike, if you want to raise your hand and say it yourself, go for it. But the question is, what about Arctic Ocean data collected by ship-based measurements? Those data are in other nations' data centers, and asking, do you collaborate to align metadata formats, et cetera?
Yeah. Okay. So I started to respond to that online and say that we do work with lots of other groups, and we are trying to facilitate an Arctic Data Federation. So there's an effort through the Arctic Data Committee called Polder, which is a Dutch word for basically working together, I think. And basically the Polder initiative is focused on trying to build a cross Arctic data facility that, you know, basically can pull data from many of the international repositories. So we participate in Polder, and we, as part of the Data One network, we make the resources available to host the Polder system and have been helping with the design and implementation of that, although we don't really have the ability to keep that going over the long run. That's, you know, the community, I think, is trying to figure out ways to pull all that information together. So Polder and Data One, I think, are two initiatives that would really be able to pull together data from many different types of repositories. The Data One initiative as a federation definitely includes most of the oceanographic types of resources. So groups like R2R in the US and NOAA in the US are part of the Data One network. But there are also a bunch of European groups like Pangea that hold lots of oceanographic data and others. The Data Federation work is definitely incipient and needs, you know, more work to expand. Our estimate, there's about 55 repositories in Data One, but we see probably on the order of over 1,000 that really need to be federated together to make an effective federation. So I think there's a lot of strategies for how to get there, and we need to keep working on that as a community.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Not to put you on the spot, Ben, but did that change your question, or do you have a follow-up that you'd like to say?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I really want to say thank you to everyone for the presentation and the team effort that was made amongst the various individuals that provided information in today's event. And I really want to emphasize and highlight the engagement that is being discussed amongst the various presenters with communities, but in particularly the Arctic. But I really want to emphasize there was very little mention in regards to the engagement of Indigenous peoples or Indigenous organizations that could help provide and develop the framework that is necessary for the collection, storage, and access and use of Indigenous data. So really also really quickly like to rectify the common misconception that was made in a statement where we're not just beginning to understand or think about our knowledge as data. It's continually evolving, and we've held it, nurtured it, and developed it over countless generations. So it's not a new realization for Indigenous peoples. We've been very proactive for quite some time in implementing measures to safeguard our data, our knowledge, and our culture, because it's our identity. But really quickly, I'd like to ask a couple of questions in response to some of the presenters' information and some of the questions that were asked. In regards to the development of these various platforms and frameworks where data is being stored, are there examples of at what stage in the development of these projects project or projects were Indigenous peoples engaged and consulted with? And were we involved before the very beginning of the project conceptualization? So during the initial discussions, and then how do these data centers ensure that the protection and proper contextualization of Indigenous knowledge as data that it hosts be accessed? What are the protocols and protections that are being put in place? I had multiple questions in there. Sorry.
No, please don't apologize. Those are great questions, and great to be framing those questions in this group, because one of the, I guess, the goals of the IARPC Data Management team in this phase of the working plan that we're at is understanding the balance between the FAIR principles for data management and the CARE principles for Indigenous data sovereignty as well, and what implementation of those principles looks like in an Arctic context. And so this is just one event where we're starting with the training component, but I hope that you'll, and everyone will keep engaging as future webinars and discussions lean more into that question, in particular focusing on the CARE principles in the Arctic as well. But I want to make sure to give the Arctic Data Center team a chance to respond to those questions as well.
Yeah. So I'll start with your first question about whether the conception of the Arctic Data Center was really grounded in consultation with Indigenous groups. And I'd have to say probably not. The Arctic Data Center is actually a follow-on to a longer history of data management for the Arctic program for the National Science Foundation. It started much before I was involved with it. My impression is that the initial ideas for the idea that the National Science Foundation needed a data repository for the Arctic section originated around the International Polar Year time. And there were a variety of research groups that were being funded by the National Science Foundation that wrote some reports that basically indicated that a data facility like this was really important, and that most of the research data that was being captured, that was being collected by researchers in the Arctic, was not being captured for other people to be able to use and take advantage of. And so that IPY sort of effort, I think, led to the formation of a group called CADIS, which was funded in Colorado to basically specifically with the mission of working with NSF-funded Arctic researchers. And at that time, I forget the exact timing of this. This was probably around the early 2000s to mid 2000s is my guess. I believe that CADIS started around 2008 or something like that. I have to look to remember the exact date. And then that was continued by a follow-on project called the Advanced CADIS that was basically continued until 2015. And at that point, the National Science Foundation recompeted the operations of that facility that existed. And we, as a data management group at UC Santa Barbara, competed for that and took over operations. So I think as a facility, it had already existed when we got involved, and I don't believe during that period there has been extensive consultation with Indigenous groups about the role of that center. I think it largely originated as a way to capture data that comes out of NSF-funded research projects. As that landscape changes, I think it's probably really valuable to start that conversation about the way that data centers interact with these groups. The way we've been approaching that is really trying to educate researchers that they need to have those conversations in their research projects with the communities that they're interacting with. So those ethical research practices statements and other things that we're doing within our metadata collection are designed to try to prompt people to think about their relationship to Indigenous lands and to communities that they're working both with and near. So yeah, there's a lot that could be done in that space. I don't know, Alan, if you have any more history on like the formation of the data facility from the National Science Foundation, but I think each of the data centers that's out there probably has a similar story like that.
Yeah, and no, I don't have more to add in terms of the history, but I think that you're ending on the right note of there's more that the data centers need to do to evolve into that place. I know from the Arctic Data Center in particular, one of the things we talk about, and you kind of touched on this when we're looking at sensitive data and ethical considerations, is understanding this is how the ADC currently works. And if the data can't be handled in the right way with correct protocols and things like that, then we don't put the data in the Arctic Data Center to begin with and just say, hey, this is the only place, it must be good enough, right? It's waiting and working with the ADC or whoever the data owners are to make sure that the data gets handled properly and find the right place for those data so that can be done appropriately. I'll also say, and let me know if this is speaking out of turn, but I know that the ADC also has an advisory board, which would love representation, not only from the research community, but from people with Indigenous data sovereignty expertise as well, to help advise and grow the data center into the future. And that's
our advisory board does have Indigenous representatives on it, although they're also academic researchers, but
yeah, awesome.
Yep.
I also want to note that we are unfortunately at our time. And so thank you, everyone. I want to be respectful of people's calendars, in particular, because for some people it's Friday afternoon. For others, I know it's just Friday morning still. But thank you so much for joining. It's been great to have you and have this conversation. The link to that shared document will stay available for a little while longer if you have more that you would like to share. Again, this recording will be available on the IARPC collaborations page and the IARPC YouTube channel. We hope that you've made some good connections here and continue to. I've noted down a few, and I'll do some matchmaking over email afterwards. And yeah, just to tease, we have another event coming up in November focusing on terrestrial ecosystems data. And if you have other topics that you'd like to see, please reach out to the IARPC or our team co-leads. We love suggestions, future speakers, and future topics that you'd be interested in. Thank you so much.